There's a moment after Princess Diana dies that never stops feeling wrong. Two boys, 12 and 15, standing behind their mother's coffin while the entire planet watches. William and Henry didn't want to do it. They were terrified, not of the walk, or what that walk will turn them into. And in the middle of the chaos, the cameras, the headlines, one person steps forward and makes a decision that still divides people today. Prince Philip. Not the soft grandpa everyone memes now. The man with no filter. The man who didn't do feelings. And yet, that day, he didn't just show up. He insisted they walk. Not because he was cruel, because Philip knew what happens when a child is swallowed by history. And his own childhood was proof. Before he ever wore a British uniform, before he ever stood beside a queen, Prince Philip was a royal child who got smuggled out of his country in a box. Not metaphorically, a literal box. He was born on the Greek island of Corfu in 1921, with royal titles attached to his name and chaos attached to his bloodline. Greece was collapsing into crisis. A war, a revolution, a government looking for people to blame. And when the system turns on you, it doesn't care how adorable your baby photos are. Philip's father was arrested. His uncle was forced to abdicate. The royal family's survival became a math problem. So they fled. Fast, quiet, desperate. And the story goes that baby Philip was carried onto the ship in a fruit crate because it was the safest way to move him without drawing attention. That's how his life starts. Not with lullabies, with exile. And when a child starts life like that, he doesn't grow up believing the world is safe. He grows up believing the world is watching. Philip's family didn't just fall apart, it scattered. His parents weren't a warm couple holding hands through hardship. They were a disaster, slowly turning into different disasters. His mother, Princess Alice, suffered a severe breakdown and was institutionalized for a period. Philip spent huge chunks of his youth without her. His father drifted away, living his own life, often far from the responsibilities of being a parent. Philip was passed between relatives, schools, and countries like a package nobody wanted to sign for. France, England, Scotland, Germany. New classrooms, new rules, new humiliation. And here's what that does to a kid. It doesn't make you soft. It makes you sharp. You learn to win by not needing anything. Not comfort, not reassurance, not affection. Because if you ask for it, someone can take it away. Philip didn't grow up learning how to be held. He grew up learning how to stand. Then the family gets darker. Because while Europe is sliding toward war, Philip's sisters marry into German aristocracy. 4 sisters, and several of those marriages pull the family right into the orbit of Nazi Germany. That's not a fun little trivia fact. That's the kind of detail that poisons dinner conversations for the rest of your life. And Philip's favorite sister, Cecily, dies in a plane crash in 1937. A brutal sudden loss that wipes out multiple members of the family in one hit. Philip is 16. His mother is gone mentally, his father is gone physically, and now his closest sibling is gone forever. If you're Philip, you don't get to grieve like a normal teenager. You swallow it. You move on. And you become the kind of person who can survive by shutting doors in your own chest. Because if you keep them open, everything falls out. By the time World War II erupts, Philip doesn't hesitate. He joins the British Royal Navy, not because it's glamorous, but because duty is the only structure he trusts. And it's not lost on anyone that he's literally fighting a war where some of his own extended family is connected to the enemy side through marriage. So Philip becomes what he's always been forced to become. A man who cuts our paths to himself to survive. He serves with distinction. He earns respect. He becomes, for the first time, something solid. Not a displaced prince, not a scattered child, a naval officer with a purpose. And then, in 1939, he meets the girl who will become the center of his life, Elizabeth. She's 13, he's 18, and she's locked in, absolutely locked in. She doesn't want a prince from the brochures. She wants him, the sharp one, the confident one, the one who looks like he'd protect you in a burning building without asking permission. And that's exactly what he becomes. But the price of marrying Elizabeth wasn't just love, it was erasure. Because to marry the future Queen of England, Philip had to stop being Philip. He gives up his Greek and Danish titles. He becomes a naturalized British subject. He adopts the name Mountbatten. It's not romantic, it's a conversion. And when the wedding happens in 1947, the optics are so tense that Philip's surviving sisters aren't invited. Because their Nazi-connected marriages are a stain the palace won't risk on camera. Imagine that. You're standing at the biggest moment of your life, and parts of your family have been deleted. Not because you hate them, because the crown needs you clean. That's Philip's first lesson inside the British royal machine. This family doesn't just control your schedule, it edits your history. And Philip, who grew up in exile, understands exactly what that means. Then comes the part no one wants men about. He doesn't marry Elizabeth and becomes the man. He marries Elizabeth and becomes number 2. And at first, it's manageable. They're young, they're in love. They think they have time to be a normal couple. Then Elizabeth's father dies, and suddenly she's queen. And Philip realizes something that quietly humiliates a proud man. No matter how strong he is now permanently secondary to his wife. The institution will always win. The rules will always win. Even their children, in a weird way, don't truly belong to him. They belong to the crown. This is where people misunderstand Philip. They think he was cold because he didn't care. A lot of the time, he was cold because he cared and couldn't control where his life is going. So he does what he's always done. He tightens up. He becomes disciplined. That discipline bleeds into fatherhood. Charles is born, and Philip is not the emotional present dad people want him to be. He's strict. He can be blunt, sometimes painfully so. And depending on who you listen to, that bluntness shaped Charles in ways that would echo for decades. But here's the part that makes it darker. Philip didn't invent that style of parenting. He inherited it. He was raised in instability. He was raised without softness. He was raised to endure. So he raises his kids like endurance is the goal. Not because he's evil, because he doesn't know another blueprint. To Philip, love looks like toughening you up so the world can't destroy you. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it breaks people in slow motion. Then come the rumors. Because Philip is a handsome naval officer turned royal consort, surrounded by public life, travel, attention, temptation. There were persistent tabloid stories about his wandering eye for decades. One of the most famous involved actress Pat Kirkwood, often cited in gossip circles. But here's what matters. Whether the rumors were true or not, they reveal something real. Philip was always trapped between two identities. The military man who wanted freedom, and the royal accessory who had to behave. Even Philip himself joked that it would be nearly impossible to conduct a secret affair while being followed by security constantly. And yet, the whispering never stops. That's the second lesson of the crown. You don't need to be guilty to be sentenced. You just need to be visible. And Philip was visible for over 70 years. Over time, Philip turns into what the monarchy needs. A shield. He takes the hits. He says the rude thing so the queen doesn't have to. His gaffes become famous. Some are funny, some are offensive. Some are just the reckless honesty of a man who never learned to perform softness for approval. But behind the jokes is something more useful. Philip is consistent. He's loyal. He's built like a wall. And that's what Elizabeth needs. Because being queen isn't just glamorous. It's a long, slow public imprisonment. Philip becomes her stability, her companion in a life where everyone around you is either bowing, flattering, or plotting. And people close to the palace have often described their marriage as deeply bonded in private, even if it looks stiff in public. A partnership, not a fairy tale. And then Years later, the monarchy faces a crisis it cannot manage with protocol. Diana dies, and the family freezes. When Diana is killed in 1997, the royal family is paralyzed. Because Diana isn't just a family member, she's a global symbol. And symbols don't die quietly. The public is furious. The press is feral. The palace is terrified of making the wrong move. Inside that storm are two boys who just lost their mother. And they're being asked to do the most unnatural thing imaginable, to walk behind her coffin while millions watch them try not to fall apart. This is where Philip's entire life converges. Exile, duty, public scrutiny, the cruelty of history, the knowledge that if you don't control the image will control you. So he does what he knows. He imposes order. And depending on your perspective, it's either the kindest thing he ever did or the coldest. Because he doesn't ask them what they want. He pushes them toward what he believes they will survive. Think about the psychology of that moment. William and Harry weren't afraid of walking. They were afraid of being watched while walking. That's the difference. Philip understood performance. He understood being turned into a story you don't control. He understood that grief in public becomes a product. So when he steps in, he's not playing grandpa. He's playing the only role he's ever mastered. The shock absorber. The one who stands between you and the world's teeth. Reports from that time often describe Philip walking with the boys, not behind them like a distant royal, but near enough to make them feel less alone. And that's not softness, that's protection. The hard kind. The kind that says, if the world is going to stare, then I'm going to stand beside you so it doesn't feel like you're being executed in public. That's why the moment lands the way it does. Because it's not a tender gesture, it's a tactical one. And tact is how the royals survive. Philip wasn't doing it for the cameras. He was doing it because he knew what happens when children are allowed to break in public. They become haunted by the footage forever. The walk becomes a loop, a forever image, a piece of history that never lets you grow up privately. Philip had lived his entire life under the logic of history first, human second. He hated that logic, but he also knew you can't escape it, so he tried to control it. And if that sounds harsh, it's because it is. But Philip wasn't the therapist. He was a man built by disaster, trained by war, trapped inside a machine. And when the machine demanded a ritual, he made sure the boys didn't have to face it alone. That's the strange truth of Philip. His love rarely looked like comfort. It looked like standing in the fire with you. In his later years, Philip becomes a contradiction people can't resolve. Some see him as the royal consort who never left the queen's side. Others see him as the sharp-tongued royal who never adapted to modern expectations. And both are true. He kept working into old age. He kept showing up. He kept the no-fuss identity to the end. Then in 2021, he dies at 99. And the queen, a woman trained to never reveal emotion, is reportedly devastated. People around her described his absence as enormous, a gap that couldn't be filled. Because Philip wasn't just her husband. He was her anchor in a life that doesn't allow you to be a normal person. And here's the final irony. The boy smuggled out of Greece in a box spent his whole life becoming a wall for someone else. A man who looked cold to the world was in private, the one person Elizabeth could relax around. And if you want to understand why he made William and Harry walk that day, it's because Philip believed in one brutal rule. If you're going to survive history, you don't run from it. You walk straight through it. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. If you want more stories where the public myth is loud, but the real damage is private, subscribe. Because royalty doesn't create icons. It creates survivors who learn to bleed in silence.